So I forgot to hit record the other night, last week, Sunday. So this is a brief recording of a poem that C.S. Lewis wrote about Lancelot. That was only published after his death in a book called The Narrative Poems of C.S. Lewis. So here goes. When the year dies in preparation for the birth of other seasons not the same on the same earth, then saving and calamity together make the Advent Gospel, telling how the heart will break with dread and tears unleaving from the rippled sky, scatter on the wind of man's redemption drawing nigh, man's doom and his redeeming and the wreck of man. Therefore it was in Advent that the quest began. In the wail of wind and flower of the Britons all went out, and desolation was in Arthur's hall, and stillness in the city of legions. Then the queen expected their returning when the woods were green, but leaves grew large, and heaviness of August lay upon the woods. Then Guinevere began to say, autumn will bring them home again. But autumn passed, with all its brown solemnities, and weathers fast came driving down the valley of the Usk with hail at Advent, and the hearts of man began to fail. And Lucan said, if summer brings the heathen men from overseas, or trouble of Picts beyond the wall, Britain will break. The San Grail has betrayed us all, according to the prophecy Pelleas the king once made, that at the moving of this holy thing our strength would fail. But Arthur, who was daily less of speech through all these winter days, gave answer, yes, I know it, and I knew it when they rode away. The year turned round and bettered, and coloured May crept up the valley of the Usk, and softening green rounded the form of forests. But this year the queen said nothing of the knight's return, and it became a custom in that empty court never to name the fear all felt, and not to listen any more for rumours, nor to watch the roads, nor place the shore. Patience, most like conspiracy, had hushed them all, women, old men, and boys. That year was heavy fall of snows, and when amid its silence Gawain first defeat from the long quest came riding home, their thirst for news he could not or he would not satisfy. He was unlike the Gawain they had known, with eye unfrank and voice ambiguous, and his answers short. Gulfs of unknowing lay between him and the court, unbreakable misunderstandings. To the king he answered, no, he had not seen the holy thing, and no, he had heard no news of Lancelot and the rest. But for his own part he was finished with the quest, and now asked leave to journey north and see his own estates. And this was granted, and he went alone, leaving a hollow-heartedness in every man, and in the queen new fear. Then with the spring began the homecoming of heroes from the quest, by twos and threes, unlike their expectations, without news, a dim disquiet of defeated men, and all, like Gawain, changed irrelevant in Arthur's hall, strange to their wives, unwelcome to the stripling boys. Ladies of Britain mourned the losing of their joys. What have they eaten, or in what forgetful land were they adventures? Now they do not understand our speech. They talk to one another in a tongue we do not know. Strange sorrows and new jests among themselves they have. The San Grail has betrayed us all. So leaf by leaf the old fellowship of Arthur's hall felt autumn's advent. New divisions came, and new allyings, till of all the table round those few alone who had not written on the dangerous quest now bore the name of courteous, and were loved the best, Mordred or Kai or Calburn or Agravain. And the queen understood it all, and the drab pain, now for 2 years familiar in her wearied side, stirred like a babe within her. Every nerve woke wide to torture with low moaning pity of self, with tears at dawn, with midnight jealousies and dancing fears, touched with their stabs and quavers and low lingerings, her soul as a musician plays the trembling strings, and loud winds from the cruel countries of despair came roaring through her, breaking down and laying bare, till naked to the changing of the world she stood at advent, and no tidings now could do her good, for ever the heart failing in her breast for fear of Lancelot dead, of Lancelot daily drawing near, and bringing her the sentence that she knew not of, the doom, or the redeeming, or the change of love. Yet, like a thief surprising her, the moment came, at last, of his returning. The tormented flame leaned from the candle guttering in the noisy gleam of wind and rain, where Guinevere, amid her room, stood with scared eyes at midnight on the windy floor, thinking, forever thinking. From beyond her door came foot of sentry and change of countersign, and then a murmur of their rough-mouthed talk between the men. She heard that in one moment, like an arrow, flew into the deepest crimson of her heart and slew hopes and half-doubts and self-deceits, and told the queen that Lancelot already had returned, had been 3 days now in the city, and sent her no word. The rain was gone, the sky was pale, when next she stirred, having no memory of the passing of the night, and in her cold, small fingers took her pen to write, and wrote 5 words and sent it by her aged nurse. Then cold hours began their march again, not worse, not better, never ending, and that night he came, out of the doorway's curtained darkness, to the flame of candlelight and firelight, and the curtains fell behind him, and they stood with all to tell, not like that Lancelot tangled in the boughs of May, long since, nor like the Guinevere he kissed that day, but he was pale, with pity in his face writ wide, and she a haggard woman holding to her side a pale hand pressed, asking, "What is it?" Slowly then he came to her and took her by the hand, as men take tenderly a daughter or a mother's hand, to whom they bring bad news she will not understand. So Lancelot led the queen and made her sit, and all this time he saw her shoulders move and her tears fall, and he himself wept not but sighed. Then, like a man who ponders, in the fire he gazed, and so began presently, looking always in the fire, the tale of his adventures seeking for the Holy Grail. How Lancelot and his shiny horse had gone together, so far that as the last they came to springy weather, sharpened buds like lances were on every tree. The little hills went past him like the waves of the sea. The white, new castles blazing on the distant fields were clearer than the painting upon new-made shields. Under high forests many days he rode, and all the birds made shrill with marriage songs their shadowy hall far overhead. But afterwards the sun withdrew, and into barren countries, having all gone through the fair woods and the fortunate, he came at last. He sees about him noble beeches overcast, and aged oaks revealing to the rainless sky shagged nakedness of roots upturned. He passes by forsaken wells, and sees the buckets red with rust. Upon the chains dry watercourse fills with dust. He crosses over, and villages on every side ruined he sees, the jaws of houses gaping wide, and abbeys showing ruinously the peeling gold, and roofless choirs, and underneath the churchyard mould, cracking and far subsiding into dusty caves. Then let the pale light in upon the ancient graves. All day he journeys in a land of ruin and bone and rags, and takes his rest at night among the stones and broken things, till after many leagues he found a little stone-built hermitage in the barren ground. And at his door the hermit stands, so pinned and thin, the bone face is scarce hidden by the face of skin. Now fair sweet Lancelot, now fair sweet friend, says Lancelot, tell me, I pray, how all this countryside has fallen into decay. The good man does not look on Lancelot at all, but presently his loud high voice comes like the call of a sad horn that blows to prayer in pagan lands. This is the daughter of Babylon who gnaws her hand for thirst and hunger. 9 broad realms in this distress are laying for the sake of one man's heedlessness, who came to the king fisherman, who saw the spear that burns with blood, who saw the grail drawing near, yet would not ask for whom it served, until there come the good knight who will kneel and see, yet not be dumb, but ask. The wasted country shall still be accursed, and the spell upon the fisher king be unreversed, who now lies sick and languishing and near death. So far the hermit's voice pealed on, and then his breath rattled within the dry pass of his throat. His head dropped sideways, and the slender trunk stands upright dead and tall against the lintel of the narrow door, and Lancelot alighted there, and in the floor of that low house scraped in the dust a shallow grave, and laid the good man in it, praying God to save his soul, and for himself such grace as may prevail to come to the fisher king and find the grail. Then up he climbed and rode again, and from his breath the dust was cleared, and from his mind the thought of death. And in the country of ruins and rags he came so far that over the grey moorland, like a shining star, he sees a valley, emerald with green and gleam of water under branches from a winding stream, a respite in the wilderness, a pleasant place struck with the sun. His charger sniffs and mends his pace, and down they go by labyrinthine paths until they reach the warm green country sheltered by the hill, jargon of birds, angelic warbles above, and Lancelot throws his mailed hood back, and liquid love wells in his heart. He looks all round the quartered sky, and wonders in what region Camelot may lie. Singing the breeze here has passed my lady's mouth, and stood a paradisal fragrance of the south. Singing, all gentle hearts should worship her, and sing the praises of her pity and fair welcoming. So caroling he trotted under lights and shadows of trembling woods, by waterfalls and sunny meadows, and still he wandered, following where the water flows, to where at the blue water's edge a shrine arose of marble pillars slender, with no wall between. Through every arch the blueness of the sky was seen, and underneath the fragile dome 3 narrow beds of lilies raised in windless air their silver heads. Behind them sat a damsel, all clothed in bright, pale airy clothes, and all her countenance filled with light, and parted lips, as though she had just ceased to sing. Lancelot thinks he's never seen a fairer thing, and checks his horse, saluting her. God send you bliss, beautiful one. I pray you tell what place is this. The damsel said, the core saints in the praise of whom this tomb is built are yet far distant from the tomb. Here, when the wasted country is no longer dry, the 3 best knights of Christendom shall come to lie. Lancelot remembers often to have heard them named, and guesses who is one of them, so half ashamed he asks her, with his eyes cast down, what knights are these, and waits, and then lifts up his eyes again and sees no lady there, an empty shrine, and on the grass no print of foot, where in grey dew the blackbirds pass. Then came on a high disembodied voice, and gave solitude tongue. A grave for boors, it cried, a grave for Parzival, a grave for Galahad, but not for the knight recreant of the lake, for Lancelot. Then came clear laughter jingling in the air like bells of horses' manes, thin merriment of that which dwells in light and height, unaging and beyond the sense of guilt and grieving, merciless with innocence. And presently he catches up his horse's head and rides again, still flowing where the water led. The sun rose high, the shadow of the horse and man came from behind to underneath then, and began to lengthen out in front of them. The river flowed, wider and always slower, and the valley road was soft with mud and winding like a worm between wide swamps and warm entanglement of puddles green, and a multitude of buzzing and of stinging flies came round his sweated forehead and his horse's eyes. The black turf squeaked and trembled at the iron hoofs. Then Lancelot looks, and sees a huddle of flat roofs upon a little island in the steaming land, a low, red Roman manor house, and close at hand a lady riding softly on a mule, who came towards him, and saluted him, and told her name, the Queen of the Castle Mortal. But to Lancelot, somewhat like Morgane the enchantress, and somewhat like Guinevere, her countenance and talking seemed, and gold like a dragon's back her clothing gleamed, and courteously she prayed him, since the night is near, turn now and take your lodging in the manor here. Lady, may God repay you, says the knight. And so over the bridge together to the gate they go, and enter in. Young servitors enough he found, that kneeled before the lady, and came pressing round. One took him, another took his spear, a third led off his horse, and chamberlains and grooms were stirred to kindle fires, and set him at the chimney side, and clothe him in the long-sleeved mantle, soft and wide. They go to dine, and presently her people all were gone away, he saw not where, and in the hall he and the lady sat alone, and it was night. More than 100 candles burned, both still and bright. His hostess makes great joy for him, and many a cup of strong wine, red as blood, she drinks, and then rise it up, and praise him bear her company, and look on all the marvels of her manor house. So out of hall, laughing, she leads him to the chapel door, and when the door was opened, fragrance such as dying men imagine in immortal countries blown about, heaven's meadows from the tree of life came floating out. No man was in the chapel, but he sees a light, and there too of many 100 candles burning bright. She led him in and up into the choir, and there he saw 3 coffins, all of new-cut stone and fair, with flowers and knots, and full of spices to the brim, and from them came the odor that by now makes dim his senses with deathly sweetness. But the heads of all those coffins passed beneath 3 arches in the wall, and on those he gazed, then on her. The sweet smell curls about their brains, her body is shaking like a girl's, who loves too young. She has a wide and swimming eye. She whispers him, the 3 best knights of earth shall lie here in my house. And yet again, lo, I have said, the 3 best knights. But Lancelot holds down his hand and will not speak. What knights are these? She said, and nay, he answered, if you name them not, I dare not say. She laughed aloud. A coffin for Sir Lamorak, for Tristram, and the 3rd lies Lancelot du Lac. He crossed himself and questioned her when they should die. She answered, they shall all be living when they lie within these beds, and then behold what will be done to all, or even to 2 of them, or even to 1, had I such grace. She lifts her hand and turns a pin sent on the wall. A bright steel blade drops down within the arches, and the coffin necks, so razor keen that scarce a movement of the spicy dust was seen, whereon the edge sank. Ay, good God forbid that you should be the murderer of good knights, said Lancelot. And she said, but for endless love for them I mean to make their sweetness mine beyond recovery, and to take that joy away from Morgane, and from Guinevere, and Nimue, and Isolde, and Elaine, and here keep those bright heads, and comb their hair, and make them lie between my breasts, and worship them until I die.